For today's video, myself and Jack are going to be going over the most interesting cards from the Black Bolt expansion, which is releasing on July 18th, alongside the White Flare expansion. For the first time, the Western sets are now going to be split up into two, with Black Bolt and White Flare. They both come out on the same day, and that means they all come legal at the same time in August, ready for the World Championships. Let's get on with some of the trainer cards then. We have Energy Coin. It flips 2 coins, and if both of them are heads, you search your deck for one basic energy card and attach it to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. 2 coin flips to have any effect, meaning 75% of the time this card is useless, of course means this is a really terrible option. We even have the energy sticker item card in format, which is just 1 coin flip. Yes, it's from the discard pile, but it's still 1 flip for 1 basic energy. So the fact that this card comes out for a 2 coin flip shows that it's pretty terrible, seeing as though we aren't even playing the single coin flip version. And just like the likes of Delivery Drone and Old PC of the past, Energy Coin, it's going to be a wasted slot in your booster packs.
We've got a couple of reprints. We've got the Antique Cover Fossil and Pokegear 3.0, as well as another print of Professor's Research. But the first reprint of a card that's not already in Standard is Air Balloon, a tool that says the retreat cost of the Pokemon this card is attached to is 2 colourless less. I always really like it when we get tools like this printed. I think they actually increase the amount of Pokemon we can play in our decks, the amount of different tech options we can play, and I think that's going to be no different for Air Balloon. For example, I think one of the biggest downsides of Zoroark EX right now is the fact it has a 2 retreat cost, meaning that your opponent can try and buy a turn or 2 back from you just by bossing it in the late game and forcing you to sit behind it trying to find ways to switch out. We already have great ways of searching for tools in the format right now, and I think any Zoroark deck is likely to play 1 or 2 of these just to make sure that you always have a pivot after your opponent has taken knockout, but also that your opponent can't try and stall behind your draw engine in the late game and you're able to just move it out of the way and can try and close out the game from there. I think there's a handful of other Pokemon that are going to benefit from Air Balloon being in the format as well. Things like Hops Dubwool, Arbok potentially, Revavroom being another draw engine that could benefit from Air Balloon. All of these Pokemon have 2 retreat costs, and whilst that hasn't been the reason they haven't been played, it's been another thorn in the side when people have been trying to consider them. There's also 3 really powerful attacking decks that I think will benefit from this, the first being Ho-Oh EX. Ethan's Ho-Oh's decks obviously all have to attach their energy to the bench, so having Air Balloon in the format means that you can throw something up with an Air Balloon, making sure that you attach all of your energy on the bench with Ethan's Ho-Oh's ability, move into the active spot with whatever attacker you want, and then use Armarouge to move all the energy up. It's going to mean that you don't always have to find extra energy to try and retreat out, or have to promote something not knowing whether you're going to have all of the energy on board to be able to attack with it. You can just promote something with an Air Balloon and then decide once you've drawn your cards. Gholdengo is another one that I think really likes Air Balloon. Obviously, Gholdengo gets an additional card if it's in the active spot when it uses its ability. So with this card, if Gholdengo has an Air Balloon, you can guarantee an extra card per turn just by promoting the one with the Air Balloon first. Those additional cards will definitely add up throughout the game, and soon you'll have 3, 4, 5, 6 more cards throughout the game to draw, and it's going to end up meaning that you find your combo pieces much more reliably going forward. Finally, the Evolutions deck. Obviously, a lot of the Evolutions have 2 retreat. You're able to move them around if you've got an Air Balloon or 2 in your deck, accelerate to the right ones, move the energy around, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about finding switch outs or extra energy to retreat or anything like that if you just play Air Balloon instead. It's the kind of card that sits at a 4-star card because it's not going to make or break a deck, but it's just a nice card to have for multiple different archetypes, and one that I think a lot of decks will benefit from.
Onto End's Plot, you move up to 2 energy from your benched Pokemon to your active Pokemon. Now we already have a similar supporter in the format in Poppy that moves 2 energy from one of your Pokemon to another. Where End's Plot differs, however, is that we could have multiple Team Rocket Spidops or Teal Mask Ogerpon in play, and we yoink from 2 Pokemon rather than from 1, so that if there are some Pokemon that have awkward energy attack costs, of course Spidops can do any type of basic energy, Teal Mask Ogerpon only being grass. If there are some Pokemon that have really devastating attacks but are difficult to power up, this could be an option in the game and is different enough to Poppy to be an option alongside possibly 4 Energy Switch within the list. And we've seen that there are a number of decks that have managed with 4 Energy Switch, even the likes of Toadscroll EX currently does so. However, I'm not really expecting too much from this combination. It's using a supporter card that, of course, isn't drawing cards, and if you are playing Spidops, you need to set up a lot of Stage 1 Pokemon. If you're playing those Teal Mask Ogerpon, you typically are going to have other decent attackers already lined up, and E-Switch should suffice. So I'm not expecting much from End's Plot, but it is different enough from Poppy to at least consider for some universal energy acceleration, although I do think Crispin is the go-to option right now in that instance.
Onto Fennel then, and Fennel is a supporter card that says heal 40 damage from each of your Pokemon. This is obviously comparable to Picnic Basket, a item tech that some people are playing right now to help deal with all of the spread options, the Dragapults, the Munkeydories, the Frostlasses in the format right now. And whilst this does heal an extra 10 damage from each of your Pokemon, I actually think this is much worse than Picnic Basket, because the other thing that Picnic Basket does is it heals your opponent's Pokemon. Now that might sound counterintuitive, you wouldn't necessarily want to heal your opponent's Pokemon, but in the case of Munkeydory is pushing damage from their side onto yours. So if you use Picnic Basket, you then heal all of the damage, they have less damage to work with to put onto your board, as well as you having less damage on your board for them to try and capitalize and take KOs on. So actually the downside of the item version of this card, I think, is an upside in the format right now, and because of that, I don't see Fennel seeing any play. I don't think there's much benefit from the extra 10 damage on your side, and I think it's actually worse than healing your opponent's Pokemon as well.
For special energy, we have the return of Prism Energy. It provides one colourless, however, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is a basic, it provides every type of energy but only one energy at a time. Now, we already have Luminous Energy in the format, and Luminous will be now the go-to for the evolving strategies. So, for example, straight Dragapult or Dragazard would still look to play the Luminous, but the Prism Energy is basically a strict upgrade for some basic attacking toolbox decks, which there aren't many of right now in the format, but Ethan's Ho-Oh EX is one that comes to mind, where now you have a nice upgrade to Luminous in that you can attach a Prism Energy for the turn more naturally rather than Luminous, that would sometimes rot in your hand if you had an additional copy already in play, or if you were trying to use your Legacy Energy. Now those Prism Energy are no longer dead, you can still manually attach those and have multiple Prism commit to one Pokemon. Not ideal, of course, because typically your toolbox needs to have lots of these flowing, but it means that it's not quite as bad as seeing additional Luminous in that hand. And also there are cards like Okidogi and whatnot that could take advantage of the Prism and have a more critical mass of Luminous and Prism Energy in certain decks. Again, there's a bit of a drawback because the Luminous can't really work alongside some of these energy cards, but possibly for Prism then like 1 or 2 Luminous go into some decks like that as well. Again, it's just a small nod to the basic strategies right now and opens up more basic toolboxes for the future. So a pretty powerful card, even though there aren't that many great users of it right now.
Serperior EX is a Stage 2 Grass-type Pokemon with the Royal Cheer ability and the Grass Order attack. Royal Cheer states that all the attacks used by your Pokemon do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and it's an ability that stacks, so having multiple Serperior out means that you get multiple buffs of damage. Considering this is a Stage 2 Pokemon, a plus 20 damage modifier isn't actually that powerful even if you have multiple Serperiors on your board. The amount of effort it takes to get a Stage 2 out, there's much better Stage 2 Pokemon that we can be playing, rather than just ones that do a passive plus 20 damage. We also have some very good damage modifiers already in format, and whilst this is universal and doesn't have any conditions related to it, that plus 20 is still not worth all of the effort it takes to get a Stage 2 Pokemon in play. Grass Order, however, does help you get multiple Serperiors out, dealing 150 damage and letting you search your deck for up to 3 cards to put into your hand.
We've actually seen this kind of attack be successful in the past, with the likes of Charizard and Braixen GX.
But that was on a basic in a time when we had very, very good universal energy acceleration. I think ultimately we'll find that this will be too slow. It being on a Stage 2 body means you just have to put too many resources into trying to get this out. And whilst you do get the returns back when you use Grass Order to help keep you going through the game, I don't think it's really going to be worth trying to play multiple of these. But if you're determined to play Serperior, I think either Ignition Energy or Yanmega EX could be the ways to go. You're actually able to buff Yanmega's already good damage with Royal Cheer at least, before you move into a late game Serperior angle where you try and be tanky with your 320 HP instead. Overall though, we don't think this is going to have particularly high heights, and that's why it gets that low star rating from us.
We have Seismitoad, which is a throwback to the black and white variant where it has that round attack once again, and all parts of the evolution line of Seismitoads share the same attack. So Timpole for 2 colours does round, 20 times the number of your Pokemon in play that has the round attack. Palpitoad, again for 2 colours energy, now does 40 times the number of Pokemon you have in play with the round attack, and the Seismitoad being the highest damage output option for 3 colourless energy, deals 70 for each of your Pokemon in play that has the round attack. So these are the only Pokemon currently with the round attack, which means if we have a combination of 4 Timpole, Palpitoad, and Seismitoad in play, that means the Seismitoad can deal 280 damage when it's using an Ignition Energy, a new card from the White Flare set, or the Reversal Energy, provided you're behind on prize cards. That can be a 1 energy attachment, 280 damage burst from a single prize Pokemon. pretty powerful, to be honest with you. This reminds me a little bit of Typhlosion, the Ethan's variant that we saw in the previous set. Now, the Seismitoad is more awkward because it requires more bench space to be committed just to this stage 2, and it has that awkward energy attack cost. So there's no doubt that I think the Typhlosion is superior to Seismitoad, but it's cool to see that we're seeing more and more of these aggressive single prize attacking decks becoming more and more possible. And bear in mind, the Palpitoad and the Tympole only attack for 2 colorless energy as well, so sometimes you can get the cheekier prizes with the lower evolutions while you're building towards the Seismitoad. And there's also an Alomomola from the set as well that can try and help out this archetype to try and recover Tympole at least every single turn of the game. So you play the full 4/4/4 count probably of your Toads in this deck, you try and cycle them, you play the redeemable tickets, you try and get these out of the prizes so you can deal your maximum damage output, and you try and make an engine possible. The good news is, because round is only taking up 4 spaces between your active and your bench slots, there's still a few spaces left over to try and get some sort of draw engine going for yourself. But at the same time, you're still going to be a little bit awkward, a little bit clunky. You're going to be terrified of the likes of Dusknoir or spread damage from Monkey Dory and Dragapult, that sort of thing, because the Tympole only has 60 hit points. I would take this a lot more seriously if Tympole had 70. Unfortunately, it's capped at the 60, which means it's falling prey to all sorts in the format right now.
On to Tirtouga then. It's got a very, very interesting attack. Ancient Debris deals 30 damage times the number of item cards in your opponent's discard pile for just 1 water energy. Now, anyone that's been playing a little while will probably have heard the rumours, if not played during a time where Trashalanche Garbodor existed and it completely warped the meta. It was incredibly powerful, one of the best single prize attackers we've ever had, lots of decks were built around it. And I think a lot of people were expecting us to get some kind of spiritual reprint of Garbodor as the Garbodor from this set. I don't think anyone expected it to be in this Tirtouga though. Obviously, it's very easy to compare the Garbodor from back in the day to this. It's actually had a buff in comparison to Garbodor from the past. Garbodor used to deal 20 damage times the number of items, this deals 30 damage, so it has had damage scaling to try and keep up with the HP scaling that we've had. But the biggest difference between these two Pokemon is Garbodor evolves from a Trubbish, whereas this evolves from a Fossil. Unfortunately, right now, the Fossil mechanic is really, really bad. It's not seeing any play at all, and I don't even think an attack like Tirtouga's can warrant you trying to play a deck built around the Fossil engine. It's way easier to find basic Pokemon than it is to find items, so when you're evolving for an item, you have to jump through so many more hoops than you usually would. We have such good ball search for Pokemon right now, and it just doesn't exist in the same way for things like Cover Fossil. Yes, we do have things like Arven, but I don't think these are going to be consistent enough to be able to get multiple Tirtougas into play for them to be a consistent threat throughout the game. I think if you do decide to build around Tirtouga, the Ancient Debris attack will ramp into high numbers quite quickly. We have a lot of decks playing all of this good ball search right now, rare candies, earthen vessels, all of these great item cards. But I think it's the Fossil mechanic that actually holds this back and puts a nail in the coffin for Tirtouga overall.
Next up we have this basic Alomomola, 110 hit point water type with 1 retreat, and it has the Gentle Fins ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may put a basic Pokemon with 70 hit points or less from your discard pile onto your bench. And honestly, this ability is phenomenal. I think there's a lot of utility here, and even if I don't think this is going to be slot into decks immediately, I think during its time in the game, it's going to see a decent amount of play. Right now, the main utility for recovering basic Pokemon could be the likes of an Ethan's Typhlosion deck, where you're constantly recovering those Cyndaquil and keeping a nice chain of attackers going for you. I suppose the same could be said for the new Seismitoad coming out as well, but also we could get more and more creative here. Funnily enough, this could be a big card for United Wings, where now you can commit all but one of your United Wings attackers, knowing that an Alomomola can bring you back the next one on the following turn, meaning that your United Wings are doing the maximum damage output with no real concern about those resources later on in the game. Interestingly as well, we have the 151 Starmie, which would discard itself by putting 2 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. This could be a way for you to reload those Staryu during the game as well. You could start your turn by promoting a Staryu, evolving into Starmie, using that Mysterious Comet, promoting Alomomola with Air Balloon or a Rescue Board, and immediately using Gentle Fins to recover a Staryu. Now again, I don't think it's a massive deal, and obviously that's not a fantastic ability. There are more ways we can manipulate damage, but it's just one of those extra cool combos that's possible right now thanks to this basic Pokemon. There's also maybe a chance for a toolbox-style small hit points, 70 hit point or less, like control deck, where we have this combination of Klefki, Mimikyu, Budju, Knackle with the corner attack, and a new Elgyem coming out in this set, All of these have 70 or less hit points. You can play one of each of them, knowing that one Alomomola in your deck then allows you to recycle it in the matchup where it's most useful. So it's equivalent to having multiple Mimikyu or multiple Knackle if that's going to be your win con in a certain matchup. So it's a really interesting space cheat card for some potential lower hit point Pokemon controlling decks. Of course, the major downside is that Alomomola has to be in the active position, so suddenly it's competing with the likes of Tatsugiri, which is already finding it a little bit difficult to fit into spaces right now into decks, just for other engine Pokemon and other Munkidori going into so many archetypes right now, to be honest with you. There isn't really much space to be giving up. And the fact that Alomomola has to be active as well is another huge issue, and so many archetypes are great at setting up multiple turns of KO by hitting into certain Pokemon and then setting up 4 prize swing turns, so you don't always have the nice pivot. However, I think overall Alomomola at the very least will go into a Typhlosion deck. I feel like it's worth the space in that. And then there's tons to explore for the current sort of roguey tier options right now with the United Wings, etc. And beyond that, I feel like this has a ton of potential going ahead. Really excited to see it. I think this is actually massive for single prize evolving variants going into the future.
Next up, we have Kyurem EX, a basic 230 HP water type with a couple of attacks. The first is Slash, which is just a 50 damage attack for 2 colourless energy. And the second is Blizzard Burst, which deals 130 damage and 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon for each prize card your opponent has already taken. That means in the best case scenario, this is dealing 130 to the active and 50 to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now, we already have a lot of spreading options right now. We have various different decks that are built around spread, but also we have things like Munkidori and Frostlass that are just being thrown into decks to add some additional damage counter placement. And I think potentially Kyurem could be a partner for a similar archetype where you're playing Munkidoris, you're playing Frostlasses, and you're using Kyurem to try and be a bit more aggressive with your spreading rather than trying to use something like a Maractus to slow down the game. You're using Kyurem to speed up the game. I do think Grimmsnarl will still be doing this better. It has much higher damage to the active Pokemon, it has better acceleration, and you don't have to wait for your opponent to take some prizes before you start spreading the damage. But ultimately, I think if you wanted to try a different version of the Frostlass Munkidori deck and wanted to try a more aggressive approach, you could play Kyurem as a basic attacker in that archetype. It's still going to be a low star rating from us, but it could be an interesting approach to trying out that archetype in a different way.
In Lightning, we have the return of Eelektrik. The Dynamotor ability is once again back in format, where once during a turn you may attach a Lightning Energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Eelektrik has 90 hit points and also has that 2 retreat cost, just like it did back in the day. Even the Electric Ball attack is the same. So this is very nostalgic and potentially very powerful, of course, because we have Tandem Unit from Miraidon EX in the format, and we know there's always been this great combination of Miraidon having early game acceleration from generators, and as you progress into the game, moving towards those Dynamotors to go on top of your turn attachments to keep you going in the game. That means your early game generators can be committed aggressively to Iron Hands EX or aggressive Miraidons themselves for early game Photon Blasters, knowing that towards the late game you have Eelektrik to keep you topped up, and potentially even have the likes of Blood Moon to close out games as well. And there's even a powerful Zekrom EX coming out in this expansion as well, which definitely will benefit from having extra energy acceleration going into the later stages of the game, because that's where Zekrom gets more powerful once the opponent has taken a number of prize cards. So I can definitely foresee there being a split now between Joltik box players, which still stick to just Jolting Charge and Crispins and stick to that engine that we know, and there could be a pivot back to almost traditional Miraidon, where it used to have Flaffy, now it has the Eelektrik package, and goes for something like double Iron Hands, just has the Miraidons, and just has Zekrom as the sort of follow-up late-game bomb, and still having Blood Moon Ursaluna in the deck. And essentially scrapping the Pikachu, scrapping the type coverage toolbox, and just saying that Iron Hands is busted against everything evolving, and the combination of Photon Blaster and mid to late game Zekrom EX should be closing out higher hit point Pokemon by virtue of your opponent taking prize cards for you. So I do think there could be a split off now. The only thing I would say is that old traditional Miraidon really relied on that Arven engine getting Forest Seal Stone. That added a lot to your consistency, and of course Raikou V was in like a lower to the ground 2 energy attacker, and I think we don't have that many great options. There are things like Tapu Koko EX in the format, but I don't think it's that strong in terms of damage output, so there might be this sort of middle ground attacker that we're kind of still lacking for an archetype like this, and that 90 hit points is still restrictive, so I don't think we're going for a full 4-4 line of Eels in our deck. I think we're still going for like a healthy 15-16 basic energy count, relying on those generators, and then looking towards having like a 1/1 or 2/2 eel within the deck list, so that your opponent essentially ignores it because taking the single prize doesn't benefit them in any way, but it means then you just stick to 2 prize Pokemon throughout the entire set. However, there have still been some Japanese lists out there that also utilize Magneton, so if your opponent is ignoring the eel and just going for 2 prizes, suddenly you have a big Magnet turn as well to put them on odd prizes for you, and maybe you can even utilize Countercatcher at that point within your list as well from an Arven option. So I think there's multiple directions for Lightning once again, and Miraidon got a lot more interesting going into this expansion. I think right now Joltik still might be the better aggressive approach, and we've seen much more success still from Joltik box than we have from a Zekrom Eel style Miraidon build, at least from the outset of these Japanese tournaments, but that's not saying much because the gym battles aren't anything like City Leagues or anything else. They're far less serious out in Japan right now. So we're still kind of in the dark about this archetype, and I think right now Joltik might edge it a little bit, but I do think there's still good competitive viability to this pure lightning approach. And a final note as well to Tynamo, it's a 40 hit point Pokemon, which is very vulnerable, but it does have a natural free retreat, so it's also a nice pivot inherently in the deck as well, which as we know is no bad thing. Leaving a single prize Pokemon active is great, and it has free retreat, so it can help you get into a Budju if you want to play that in your deck, or anything else you want to just shove in the active, or it just becomes a natural optimal lead for you to then get into Iron Hands that little bit easier, where you don't need a Balloon, you don't need a switch card, this, that, and the other, you don't need that Lati as well. You can much more naturally just get into those attackers, so the Tynamo also a great lead in the deck, which I think is also worth noting. If you do want to have a slightly thicker count of the 2/2, because you have this great basic, I think that is justifiable as well.
On to Zekrom EX then, I think the best card in the set. Zekrom EX, similar to Kyurem, has 230 HP, it's a basic Pokemon, and has 2 attacks, the first being that slash attack for 2 colourless energy for 50 damage, and the second being Voltage Burst for 2 lightning and a colourless, dealing 30 damage plus 50 more for each prize card your opponent has already taken, only at the expense of dealing 30 damage to yourself. Now, a 50 times modifier for each prize card your opponent has taken is a massive, massive modifier. It's a very big deal. By the time your opponent's taken 3 prize cards, you're actually dealing more damage than a Charizard EX. And that's on a basic Pokemon too, so arguably it's even easier to set up with the likes of Eelektrik and Electric Generator. By the time your opponent's taken 4 prizes, you're dealing 330 damage, and 5 prizes means you're dealing almost 400 damage for just 3 energy. I think ever since Miraidon lost Raichu V, it's had challenges trying to deal high amounts of damage. It's had Pikachu EX, but that has a really awkward energy cost, and of course is capped at 300 damage, whereas this can easily one-shot Stage 2 EX Pokemon without any modifiers. The fact this is comparable to Charizard on a basic with acceleration that actually also works in the mid-game as well, you're very easily going to be dealing with 230 as soon as your opponent's taken the first 2 prizes. I think that really opens up the doors for how we can build Miraidon once again. We already have the Joltik style builds, and they may stick around. They can easily add in Zekrom as well as a late game attacker, but I think there's definitely going to be room for a pure electric energy style deck with Eelektriks and Electric Generators similar to Miraidon of the past. This is by far and away, I think, the strongest card in the set, an easy 5-star for us. It's going to be really impactful, and I expect this to have a big, big splash at the World Championships this year.
Another really interesting card is a Meloetta EX. It's a 200 hit point Psychic type basic with a 1 retreat cost, and it has the live Premier ability, stating that this Pokemon can attack on the first turn going first. Definitely a terrifying ability, and does open up some interesting avenues here. The Echoed Voice itself for 1 Psychic just deals 50, and during your next turn, this Pokemon's Echoed Voice does 80 more damage, so 30 into the 110 can start some pressure, but I think more people are interested in some TM options that can go alongside the Meloetta EX. Now, going first, it's possible for you to get Meloetta into the active position, get a turn attachment, and use your favoured TM, whether it's a Turbo Energize or a TM Evolution, to immediately go into a number of Stage 1 Pokemon and start threatening your Stage 2 much more reliably on that turn 2 of the game when you've gone first. Because of course we do have a Turbo engine currently in the game. We have the Carmine supporter, we have Squawkabilly EX, even something like Secret Box would be a massive card within an archetype like this if you lean heavily into Meloetta, so that you can get some Stadium for some basics out if you're going to Evo them. It can get you your tool card for a pivot, it can get you even the TM as well to get that Meloetta rolling. So I feel like we've seen, similar to the aggressive Poison Donk deck, that Squawk, Carmine, Gear, and Box can reliably get you towards something. But what I will say is, in terms of getting a Donk, It's possible with Meloetta, but it's not that likely. I, in fact, think the poison package with the Bonnet Petrarunt and the Jungle is more reliable than something like a Volcanion EX Burn plus Magmortar TM Evolution combo, because that's possible. You can get Volcanion in the active, Scalding Steam to burn, and then get Meloetta into the active using its ability on a TM Evolution to get into 2 Magmortar. It's possible for you to have an 8 damage counter burn tick going onto your opponent, but it's just far more pieces than getting the poison package, because you need to get additional basics into play this way round, and more Pokemon pivoted in and out of the active, because Volk has to be in the active, then get away, and Meloetta has to end in the active position, whereas the Petrarunt Poison just needs Petch in the active to end the combination. So it doesn't add to the reliability of a Donk, I don't think. I'm more so interested in how it can play out with these TMs over anything else. However, it is really warping your deck quite substantially to try and make it happen. Having these Carmine, which obviously isn't a great supporter in the mid-game, putting Squawkability into play, which is a vital bench space and also a vulnerable 2-prize Pokemon, alongside Meloetta, which is also a vulnerable 2-prize Pokemon, I think that speed of getting those stage 1s isn't always going to be worth it. Now, I think the potential of this card is really cool, and it might be that new ladder threat where people are trying to race to Arceus as quickly as possible with essentially a Donk meme deck. I think we might see a bit of that, but I don't think competitively there's going to be a huge amount for Meloetta. It feels like you have to jump through too many hoops to make it work. I did just want to have a quick note for the Elgyem. It's a 60 hit point psychic type with the slight shift attack. For 1 psychic, you can move an energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. What's really interesting about this Elgyem is that it's finally not disrupting energy on the active spots. That's typically what we see with our supporter cards, and a lot of previous attacks have been very similar to this. So the fact that you can already have someone in a lock and then start using slight shift is a really intriguing option to me. And also you can like set up damage on Pokemon, slight shifting your energy all onto one Mon and then taking like a mid-turn KO with some abilities like later down the line. I think that's also intriguing as well. I'm mostly interested in this card from a controlling standpoint, where you can have something already trapped via counter catchers and like Gravity Gemstone, those sorts of combos, knowing that you're getting that guaranteed energy removal in air quotes, but it's actually better than an energy removal because there's so much Super Rod, there's so much Night Stretcher in format right now. It's much better to park those energies on essentially useless non-attacking Pokemon that your opponent has in play, to then deny the opponent ultimately of their resources. So keep an eye out for this card. I know it's going to be in Sanders Binder, so just be aware of it more than anything else.
Unfortunately, the next EX in the set is nowhere near as exciting. Excadrill is a 270 HP fighting type with the Piercing Drill attack that deals 60 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon and 60 to 1 of their benched Pokemon that already has damage counters on them. That's not going to be strong enough these days, especially for a 2 energy typed attack cost. You can just compare this to Dragapult, which is admittedly a stage 2, but just does so much more for just 2 energy. Similarly, Rock Crush for 3 energy, only dealing 200 and ignoring resistance, isn't particularly impressive either. Everyone was hoping for something cool from Excadrill, but unfortunately it's just going to end up as a 1-star.
There's a stage 1 Mandibuzz. It's a stage 1 with 110 hit points with the Hunt for Prey ability. Once during your turn, you may have your opponent reveal their hand, choose a basic Pokemon with 70 hit points or less that you find there, and put it onto their bench. So this is definitely a disruptive effect. You're trying to clog the bench for the opponent and ideally find lower hit point vulnerable Pokemon, which I imagine you're then trying to pick off for easy prizes. If it's going to be a Gardevoir with a bunch of monkeys, or if it's going to be a Dragapult, so you can start sprinkling those damage counters, that sort of thing. I imagine that's what this card's meant to be used for. I can't foresee it overtaking something like Erica's Invitation in a controlling archetype, because firstly, most Pokemon under 70 hit points are going to be main attackers, because that's what, you know, they kind of evolve up into the big stuff, so they're not great trap targets. And only targeting 70 hit point Mons doesn't give you that higher chance to actually hit from it. But I do think there's this really aggressive approach, maybe with like a straight pot, where you have this to try and force yourself into an easier prize route, where rather than looking for a big combination to close the game, now suddenly you can force a basic down and then you just like Hawlucha or Monkey your way to win. But that would force a Mandibuzz coming into the deck, and that's not very consistent, and it's taking up space on the board and within your deck. So I'd be very surprised if this one saw play. Even though it's a disruptive ability, it's still a little bit too much to reliably get going for you.
Finally then, we have Genesect EX, a 220 HP Metal-type Pokemon with the Metal Signal ability. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 Metal Evolution Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. I think the obvious synergy here is going to be Gholdengo, and I do expect this to go into Gholdengo decks as a way of easily being able to find your Gholdengos on turn 2, since that basically is all the deck wants to do. As soon as you get your Gholdengos out, you can start using Bonus Coin to draw some cards. And I think it actually plays into the strategy that Gholdengo decks really want to try and implement. Being a racing deck, but being a stage 1 instead of a basic one, means that you have a little bit more HP, you have a limited damage cap, and one of the biggest issues was just making sure that you could start the race as quickly as possible, and I think Genesect pretty much completely mitigates that worry. I would expect to see up to 2 of these. I think it's that important in some Gholdengo decks, just to try and find your Gholdengos as quickly as possible. It's an easy 4-star from us, and also any metal Pokemon that get printed in the future will have a massive consistency boost just from Genesect existing.
And that has been our set review for Black Bolt. Let us know what you thought down below. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? And what deck are you going to be playing first when the set comes out in a couple of weeks' time? Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in another video tomorrow.